The person you know with the best grades and the most respectable job may actually be the one who fears payday the most. Everyone else thinks he already made it. He went to a good school, has a polished resume, got into a big company, and now sits in an office tower attending meetings, replying to emails, and putting together presentations. At family gatherings, he is always the one relatives describe as doing well. But only he knows that the day his paycheck arrives is the most stressful day of the month. His phone starts vibrating. Mortgage, car payment, credit card bills, insurance, his kids' tuition and extracurricular classes. The money does not slowly get spent. It gets divided up the moment it hits his account. What outsiders see is a polished life. Only he knows that the feeling of not being able to stop has never gone away for even a day. It is not that he is not making money. On the contrary, he is very good at making money. But what he fears has never been earning too little. What he fears is that one day this paycheck might suddenly stop. So where exactly did things go wrong? He clearly followed the path everyone considered the right one. Study hard, get a good job, earn stable income. By all logic, someone like this should feel safer and safer over time. So why is it that in real life, after struggling for more than 10 years, so many people do not end up with freedom, but with a life that keeps getting more expensive and harder to leave? Many people blame income for not being high enough, and many also blame life for being too expensive. None of that is wrong. But if that is the whole answer, then you still cannot explain something else. Why is it that some people become more anxious the more they earn? Why is it that some people become more afraid of losing their job the more stable their work becomes? Why is it that some people are already living the life others envy, yet still seem to be running as if money is chasing them? Only later did he slowly realize that the problem might not be salary alone. It was that from very early on, almost everything he heard was about how to keep life stable and how not to make mistakes. There is a book that turned this into two fathers. One is The Poor Dad, the other is The Rich Dad. As a child, Robert Kiyosaki stood between these two men. Both were adults, both were serious, and both wanted the child to have a good future. But the moment they spoke, it felt like they were describing two different worlds. The poor dad side feels very familiar. At the dinner table, the whole family sits together eating, and the things the adults repeat over and over are always the same. Study hard, do well in school, find a stable job in the future. Do not mess around, do not take risks, just make sure life stays steady. In his world, money looks best when it arrives on time every month, and the most important thing in life is not to make mistakes. Do those words sound familiar? They are incredibly familiar. A lot of people grew up hearing exactly those things. It is not because their parents did not love them. On the contrary, it is because they loved them so much that they wanted to hand them the safest road they knew. But the rich dad side was different. Robert's friend Mike came from a family that ran businesses. Mike's father did not care much about how many points you scored. What he asked more often was this: where does this money come from? Where does it go next? What keeps taking money out of your pocket? And what can still bring money back to you even when you are not working? Of course, a child would be stunned hearing questions like that for the first time, because school never tests you on this, and families rarely talk about it this way either. More importantly, Rich Dad did not just sit there talking. He would take Robert and Mike outside and show them. He took them to stores, where they watched customers come in waves and walk out carrying things. He took them to construction sites, where they watched a building slowly rise out of the ground. He took them to offices, where ledgers, invoices, and checks were spread all over the desk. He didn't rush to give conclusions. He simply wanted the two boys to see one thing first. Money is not something you just receive. Money moves. Some people spend every day chasing it. Others first build a path so that money can slowly flow toward them. That is the biggest difference between the two fathers. Poor Dad would say, "Get a good job, and you will be safe." What Rich Dad believed was this: if all you have is a job, you will never be truly safe. Because the moment you stop, the money stops too. One teaches you how to get through today. The other teaches you how to make sure that later on, life will not depend only on you holding everything together by yourself. This is where the book really hits people. It never says that hard work is useless. It simply places a truth in front of you that many people do not want to admit. Some people work desperately just to keep life from falling apart. Others work hard so that one day, their life will no longer depend entirely on working. The difference does not look that big at first, but 10 or 20 years later, those two paths lead to completely different lives. Now go back to that man sitting in the office tower. When he first started working, he did not think he was any different from anyone else. Get paid, live life, wait for the paycheck at the end of the month. Back then, his salary was not that high. And life was not that easy either, but at least it was simple. At the time, he thought that once his income got higher, life would get easier too. Later, he really did get a raise. The first time he got a raise, he was genuinely happy. The feeling was real. It felt like proof that all those years of grinding had not been for nothing. So he started upgrading to a better house and a better car. Later, when the kids were born, he started seriously comparing neighborhoods, schools, and all kinds of extracurricular programs. Every dollar he spent felt justified. What about any of it was unreasonable? You need a place to live, right? You need a car, right? Your kids cannot have nothing, right? After working this hard for so long, shouldn't life get better? And that is exactly where the problem begins. Choice by choice, all of this adds up. And what grows out of it is not just a better life, but an entire life that costs more to maintain. Before, when the paycheck came in, he could still breathe a little. Later, when the paycheck came in, the payment notifications started popping up one after another. It is not that he did not earn the money, it is that before the money could even settle in his account, it had already been fully assigned. Slowly, he began to realize something very hard to admit. He was not becoming freer, he was just becoming more expensive. On the surface, life was upgrading, but from another angle, he was only tying himself tighter and tighter into a life he could no longer afford to stop. That is when the simplest line in Rich Dad Poor Dad finally starts to carry real weight. What puts money back into your pocket, and what keeps taking money out of your pocket? The first is an asset, the second is a liability. The hard part is not understanding those two words. The hard part is whether you dare to place them back over your own life and look at it again. That bigger house looks like success, but if it steadily takes more money out of your pocket every month, then at least in terms of cash flow, it is not making you freer. That nicer car looks like another step forward, but if you have to keep this exact job just to afford it, then it is not really standing on your side either. To put it bluntly, the problem is not that he does not make enough money. It is that every extra dollar he earns goes first to feeding a more expensive version of today, instead of building a way out for tomorrow. That is the dividing line. One person gets a raise and upgrades life. Another person gets a raise and buys a little more in assets. Maybe the difference is tiny. Maybe at first, you cannot even see it, but a few years later the gap becomes obvious. The first person becomes more and more dependent on the paycheck. The second slowly becomes less dependent on it. When the first person thinks about quitting, resting, or changing direction, the first thoughts that jump into his mind are, what about the mortgage? What about the car payment? What about the kids' expenses? The second person still feels fear too, but at least he knows that salary is not the only thing he has. That is what real security actually is. Not a title, not other people's idea of a respectable life. Not even that paycheck showing up on time next month. Real security is knowing that even if one day you no longer sit in that position, your life will not collapse immediately. That may be the deepest difference between the poor dad and the rich dad. One person keeps thinking about how to hold the present together. The other starts much earlier to think about how to prepare a path for the future. One spends his life desperately carrying today forward. The other lives today while quietly leaving something behind for tomorrow. The saddest part for many people is not that they never made money. It is that all the money they did make went into feeding the increasingly expensive life right in front of them. Life looks more and more like success, but the person living it becomes more and more unable to stop, until one day, he finally sees the truth. The scariest part was never having to work hard right now. The scariest part was that after all these years of working this hard, he still had nothing that could keep carrying his life forward when he was no longer working. A lot of people think what they need is a slightly higher salary, but in the end, what they really need is a life that does not put its entire fate on the next payday. If tomorrow comes and he stops going to work, what is there now that can keep all of this standing? If the answer is nothing, then maybe what he spent all those years desperately protecting was never freedom at all. Maybe it was only a life that begins to fall the moment he stops. And what is even more brutal is that many people do not realize until middle age that the thing they worked hardest to protect all these years was also the very life that made them afraid to stop. So the real question has never been how much you make right now. The real question is if that paycheck disappears tomorrow, what exactly is still left in your hands? What are you fighting this hard to protect right now? Freedom, or just another burden you can no longer afford to put down?